Hey, good afternoon to all of you. I want to begin by stating what I had told the people I came, the people that are presenting today. They're great people. Some of them I've known for years, and they're all pushing on the frontier for a better world. And that's our hallmark at SDIG. When you look at the composition of whether they are the presenters or the audience, we insist on true diversity. Not like senators who were discussing women issues and they were all men. There wasn't even a single voice that represented those they were talking about. And we've insisted that we're not gonna be like that. So that's why we operate how we operate, and we continue to do that without any equivocation. So it's a pleasure to see all of you. And, we're gonna begin by stating how it's gonna go today. The first will be the speakers will be introducing themselves as they're called. And afterwards, I would have a number of questions for them. And at the end of those questions, we will open the door for everyone, audience, to ask questions. And then they will answer the questions. If you want an individual to focus on your question, the questioners, you can pinpoint the person you want to address your question. If you want to address the question to all of them, you should also do that. And the question is actually the most important part of this. Now, having said that, it's a pleasure to have all of you. I asked my administrative assistant to send a message to the presenters, or rather the panelists this morning. I asked him to tell them to dress up, and that the dress code is dress up. So I guess some of them may be looking and saying, this crazy guy, he told us to dress up and he didn't dress up. Well, that will give us opportunity to begin to look at the power of multiple stories. You have your perspective of what dress up means and where I came from. When I put on this one I have on now, I feel like a king. I don't believe there's any dress up more than this. However, based on your cultural shaping, you may have a different view of dress up. So the key is that we're gonna respect all the dress ups as part of the equation. And that will lead me to transition to really give a shout out to some people that I know are pushing on the frontier in their different solo areas. When I say solo, it means that oftentimes nobody knows about their struggle, their pain, their anguish, and so many other areas. And their names are Martin Stark, who is in Australia. I have Christiana, who is in keep forgetting her last name, but she's in California. And I have our own Celia, who has been moving mountain to bring the issue of sexual orientation or sexual transitioning people and so on and so forth to fore. And that's why I say that they are struggling in a lonely environment where their issues are barely discussed. She was talking about so many of them that are killed and so on and so forth. And that is not different from other societal issues. That's why if you're familiar with my work, I keep pushing for society that will have to look at problems as having systemic one. We have a systemic problem. And the only way to overcome the systemic problem is to adapt to systemic solution. One unit doing one thing there or the other doing there will not solve it. If you recall, when Floyd George Floyd was killed, Congress rushed into coming up with a policy. They say policing, policing. I'm like, no, 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 no. It's not, it's just police issue. Police is a microcosm of the society. Police is as bad as the society, if not less. So ladies and gentlemen, today the focus will be education. Again, education is just a small subset of the issues that propel me to be pushing for, collective will. So I'm gonna begin by not necessarily telling you who these people are. I know who they are, and they are specialists in their areas. So I think the best thing for me to do is to enable you to hear from the horse's mouth. Therefore, I'm gonna ask them to introduce themselves, tell us what they do, tell us what motivates them, because it always starts from somewhere. And more importantly, from SDIG standpoint, to tell us how what they do align with the purpose of SDIG, where our quest is for peace, equity, and social justice for all. So from this, I'm gonna send this to, let's go to David, since we have two women in this program. So let's look at David as the minority of us. He has to begin.
I was gonna say, wait, we're not doing ladies first here? Okay. My name is David Hoffman. I'm an educator. I've been teaching for 17 years. I like to consider myself more of a facilitator of learning rather than a teacher. Teachers tend to have more of that tag of speaking to the students, and I'd like to engage the student in activity, really that experiential learning. One of the things that motivates me in teaching, and I've also done coaching, I've done a lot of mentoring. That's been a big part of what I do in those years, whether that's extracurricular, what have you. Recently started an organization called Raising Innovation, really trying to drive some of the issues that we were just talking about, the awareness, the self-awareness, more of a push for global education, connections between small business, communities, the school, the home, really get the full, if you will, the village raising the child. Expanding what we look at as the classroom. A lot of talk has been done about global education, but even IB points out that they're not as effective implementing this philosophy. So that's part of what really motivates me. The big motivator has always been my disappointment with education. Since almost as young as I can remember, going into third grade even, going up and trying to sign out a book and being told you can't read that, and being taken over to the little kids section, having to start there to prove what I was capable of reading. And the list could go on there, but the motivation has really been to change teaching. There's been a lot of frustration over the years in trying to do that. My master's degree is in creativity, studies in creativity. So engaging that in my classrooms has always been a big part of that motivation as well. And I think that idea of student advocacy, incorporating student voice, teaching through stories, that's probably why I was drawn to teaching English primarily, is really what aligns that. I mean, I've even mentored Amnesty International groups. So my heart has always been with empowering and helping empower and give voice to those that often were marginalized and didn't have the voice to speak up for themselves, or were searching for ways how, helping address the system that's keeping that from happening equally. So.
Okay, thank you. Why don't we go to Shala?
Good morning. So my name is Charlotte Stevens, and I am the CEO of Healing Racism in Schools. And what I do is I provide anti-racist professional development for school leaders and school districts. And my story of why I got into this was also through disappointment. I can relate to some of the things that David shared. I was always really into learning, but my schools were racist, and my schools did not provide me opportunities to see positive representations of myself in the curriculum. My counselor did not encourage me to go on to college. They encouraged me to go into low wage, low skill jobs. And so I barely graduated high school. My high school was investigated for being racist and found that that was the case. And so that had a negative impact on me. And I internalized a lot of my failures as a result of that. But because both of my parents have graduate degrees, they were like, you're going to college. And college was an amazing experience for me. I did very well in college. I did very well in college, despite everybody telling me that, you know, if you don't do well in high school, you're not going to do very well in college. But the difference for me was my college offered me representation and opportunities for me to learn about myself, opportunities for me to see myself in the curriculum and to finally have teachers that believed in me. And so that made all the difference for me. And I ended up with graduating summa cum laude from Howard University, same school as our new Vice President, Kamala Harris, and getting my master's degree in education best practices. So I spent about 20 years in various roles in education, and I was very disheartened to see that we are still not serving our Black and Brown students in particular, especially our Black students. And from teaching history at the AP level in high school, I saw how much we still center whiteness and how much we still do not tell the stories of all the contributions of the millions of people of color who have contributed to society. And there was no real professional development in place to challenge the bias and the racism and the attitudes that our educators bring into the classroom and that is perpetuated in our curriculum. And so that's why I started Healing Racism in Schools, to address that. So I now create comprehensive, year-long transformational anti-racist training for school leaders and school districts to do things like check their identity, and what biases you bring into the classroom, check your curriculum in the ways that we center whiteness, and to really look out for the psychological safety of Black and Brown students. So anybody who's interested in finding out more, you can contact me at healingracisminschools@gmail.com. And I'm happy to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. Okay, it's now Lois. I think Lois is the person I've known for the longest. I'm familiar with her story, and I'm not gonna get to it. She probably give you a synopsis of it. But what I would like you to keep in mind when she's talking is to begin to see the interconnectedness of all the stories, from David to Shala, and then to Lois. And I can guarantee that if you do, with all those things combined, you begin to have a way to begin to look at our current situation. COVID has exposed so much that many people didn't know. What COVID-19 had effectively done is to give us a common lens through which we see pain, through which we can see circumstances different people may be subjected to at different times. And those circumstances cannot be divorced from their life trajectories. To that end, let me get back to the introduction. Lois, could you take it away?
Thank you, Joseph. Well, I'm delighted to be here. I'm Lois Letchford. My book is Reverse to Memoir, and I consider myself a literacy problem solver. I've specialized in teaching some of the most vulnerable students to read. My students many expected never to learn to read. And my task was simply teach them to read, which I did. It's a very personal story which motivates and propels me. My school diagnostician called my 7-year-old son, Nicholas, the worst child I've seen in 20 years of teaching. The prognosis was dire and expectations flatlined. But her words pushed me to say, I don't care what you call him, but don't expect him to then learn like everyone else. 25 years later, after an extraordinary set of circumstances, my son achieved the impossible, a PhD in applied mathematics from Oxford University. It's because of him And his learning experience is that I became a reading teacher and a reading specialist. And I went on to teach some of the most vulnerable students. I believe our students are not empty vessels, but everyone arrives with an invisible backpack of language, of culture, and experiences. And these are vital tools that need to be tapped to encourage every child to succeed. I've found that in teaching minority students, the power came through not just teaching children to decode, but having students connect with literature through the characters that look like them, through the similar circumstances or circumstances my students could find themselves in, and through their culture. It's my belief that we can and we must teach every child to read.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Oh, Shala, I'm sorry, but you know, we're gonna take care of it next time. All right. Okay, as we proceed, I want us to look at the issues we are going to deal with today, which is education. The guests have, you know, touched them in some ways, but I want to give you just a really, you know, would I say, tip of the iceberg. The current situation we found ourselves is further exposing not only the impact of inequities, but also how it bleeds into education. And as I said, it's a systemic thing, things connect, it's like web-like. One thing connects to the other. You can never divide things. They are all connected, all of us, and we are all connected in this together. My wife, you know, who has served as a reading specialist and she's a teacher, and she was bitterly talking about some new students they brought to her class. She's a 4th grade teacher. Now, in her class, she has students who can't speak English, and they don't have anybody to help them at home. Or students who don't have technology, even though we push that everybody's gonna be used the tool, which I think I understand. If so for some of us who understand when medical officials say, well, wear this, it protects. But for some others, I cannot discuss much on that. But the key or the point I'm trying to allude to is different people have different circumstances. Part of being a good administrator, as I asked her, I said, what does your principal know this? Then instead of talking about the issue, she said, she kind of said, what do you mean? I said, okay, I rest my case. But the point I was making is that the last time I checked, the instructional leaders are supposed to be the principals. So they should know some of these things. If they don't know, God help us. So with that, I look at what different people are going, just for that example. So I'm gonna shift the thing to these excellent panelists to begin to tell us, and when you are answering this question, I would like you to look at both the administrative part of it, curriculum issues, and how do you frame curriculum and have your teachers prepared to be able to utilize best practices in teaching and learning. Research is clear on all these things. Why is it that we are seeing something different? So I would like to have you respond to that phrasing. That is, in other words, how would you encourage your administrators, your curriculum specialists, and those who engage in teaching to be able to see not only the students that they were up to seeing, that is, students who were raised in the same culture as theirs, how would you address them and help them to meet the needs of those they never know about? And in some cases, the schools never taught them about. Let's begin with, will I say, Shala?
Sure. When I hear you speaking about this issue, I think about how our schools were never created to teach everybody. I know that, I think it was Jefferson who said that, you know, education is about teaching the creme de creme. And he was talking about the creme de creme of white men, and that everybody else, so the creme de creme should be the educators, and they should get educated, and then the rest of us should be workers. And so for people of color, students of color, that puts us in a position where we are never learning to be business owners or be innovative, et cetera. So again, the schools were never about teaching us. So when we see that they're not teaching us, that's in alignment with the original mission of education in this country. So I believe that it comes from, our administrators have to take this seriously, that we have to be committed to teaching an anti-racist and inclusive curriculum. And if the administrators don't have that training for themselves and are not holding their team accountable, then it's not going to create change. And again, Joseph, I'm not sure anybody could see me. I think the camera's still on you, just so you know. But
Actually, your spotlighted. Everybody can see you. You're the one I'm seeing.
Great. I'm sorry. I just can't see it from over here, but that's fine. But that's what I think the issue is, that for most of our teachers, there's no training around creating a multicultural curriculum, creating an anti-racist environment, or a place that's psychologically safe for students. And so a lot of teachers may be trying, but when that professional development is lacking, or when within our teacher education curriculum, we don't emphasize that. As far as my understanding of teacher education in California, there is one multicultural class that teachers are required to take, but we know that 83% of our teachers are white females, and that our classes are becoming more and more diverse. And so we see that disconnect. And when it comes to suspension rates and discipline measures, we see that, you know, it's the Black students primarily who are being deprived of their education. And so we have as long as this country has been America, we have been depriving Black and brown students of their education. And I believe that that's embedded and part of our foundation as a white supremacist institution. It affects all of our systems, and it's very much a part of education. And education needs to be reformed from the top to bottom. But in the meantime, while we still have 83% white teachers and most of our students being of color, we need to address the inherent white supremacy that is embedded in our curriculum, our attitudes, our culture. It is a white middle class culture in our schools, and there's a way that we have set up the culture that just is not cohesive. It doesn't work for other cultures of color. So for example, the idea that we're all supposed to just sit down in and be quiet and sit in these chairs and listen to this authority figure and just you know, learn in that environment, that is not a reflection of some of the African elements of African American community, or even just Black community. You know, we're animated, we want to talk, and a lot of times the things that make us who we are in direct not violation, but it doesn't work with school culture. And I believe that's by design. So it's not a surprise to me that our schools aren't working. I think that they are working exactly as the founders intended, which is to make sure that we have a working class that will continue to support the owning class and maintain white supremacy. So there you go. I think it's about, I just want to emphasize it's about professional development. Go ahead.
Okay, if I may follow up with that question, when you said by design, I think I could use the word by design in an interchangeable way to look at what I perceive it as. In some cases, not all, in some cases, yes, you're right. But I also believe that we have artificial walls. I tend to use myself as example. I was brought up by dad and mom, whom I think I will always wish there's another world where I would ask God to give them as my parents. So as I look at it, I see what I described in my work as artificial walls. And these walls tend to demarcate people, whether it's in communities or in even the states. Now we have the red states and the blue states, we have the South and this. So what I characterize as walls are preventing people from one side of the wall from knowing the people on the other side of the wall. Mm. And I use that word because it reminds me of people I've met great people I've met who are white, who are really good at deciphering these issues, doing different things they can, or rather within their power, to change that. And I think you have one of them here, Dr. Feinstein, and that's not to praise him in his presence. I've seen him in action. I've seen what he had done. Those are people I tip my hats for. So what I am getting at is that if you really look at these things closely, you cannot divorce anyone from the company he or she keeps. Yes, you're right. The racist will groom people who will turn out to be racist. But as an educator, when you see those kids who've turned to being racist and their action tend to reflect racism, what recourse do you have? How would you change these people, keeping in mind that they didn't choose the family they were brought into. They didn't choose how they were brought up. They didn't choose their companies. And as I indicated clearly, we are the companies we keep, whether we believe it or not. As I said about my beloved parents, they shaped me to respect everyone, regardless of whom the person may be. And so from that vantage standpoint, as a teacher, what would you say to those people who became what you may perceive as, by design, and yet they didn't play a role in becoming that which you call by design? How would you address that?
Are you talking specifically to me?
Yes.
So in your question is,
like if I
interacted with a teacher.
Well, you can choose your path, whether there are teachers, because there are teachers who've been groomed not to see others, but to use this single, as Ngozi said in her book, single story rule to say, these are the good ones, these are the bad ones. But being a scholar, to be able to see how certain people have been shaped and how they cannot divorce themselves from that experience. The only experience, if we may add, that they had is terrible. We don't want that in any school. But for instance, if you're in a school where the principal is in alignment with such view or belief system, are there ways you can do something about it? And if any, could you tell us?
So I think there's two types of principals in that situation, right? We have principals who are in that situation and aren't aware, and who have just been conditioned, because we've all been conditioned to embrace white supremacy regardless of who we are. So there are some who aren't aware and who want to do better and who just need exposure and need relationships and need more knowledge. And then there's another type of principal who knows exactly what they're doing and is fine with it. And that principal, I'm not sure what we can do there. If they're committed to upholding white supremacy, if that's what they want to do, I'm not sure. But the other, what I find that most educators, in my experience, is there's just a lack of knowledge that we are all conditioned, and myself included. So I think about what caused me to change, right? So when I had narrow-minded, limited views about a certain population, what is it that caused me to then expand my mind, expand my thinking? And I think it's all about relationships. And as you were talking, I think about a particular student. I had this white male student in my 12th grade class, and at the beginning of the school year, he was telling other people, Miss Stevens hates white men. So that's what he was going around saying. And this was because I had said things like, even Obama was the president at the time. And I said, I know Obama's the president, but the Senate is still white. It's still white men in control. And he didn't like that. I did not alienate this kid. I didn't back down from my position. I'm going to teach you the truth, whether you want to hear it or not. That's my job and my professional responsibility. I worked on creating a relationship with this thing. What was really important, really, in soccer, and his dad ran some corporation. He made a lot of good money, but he was never present. And he really longed for more time with his dad, and his dad is a white man. So I was able to understand that some of his issues were linked to, I miss my dad. And throughout the school year, I would talk to him about his dad. I would talk to him about soccer. Again, I did not back down from my position. And by the end of that year, he thanked me. He gave me a card. He said, you know, you opened my eyes to things that I couldn't see. And now that I recognize that I'm in a position of privilege and that I can create change. And I hope that, you know, that's what I do. So I think it's about not giving up on people. And not to say that, you know, you need to protect your psychological safety. Sometimes it's draining, but I think it's about building those relationships and still standing in your power of, I'm not going to compromise my truth and my voice. You're going to hear my opinion or my experience, whether you like it or not. But it's not about good people by bad people. There's not that. We need to get away from this binary of having racist beliefs makes you bad. I think that if you decide to stay there, if you are aware that you are acting in a racist way and you decide to remain racist, yeah, that's bad. But I think that we all have those attitudes because we were brought up in a country that is saturated in white supremacy. So it's not about demonizing people, it's about re-educating people and making them aware of what they're doing. And when I think about principles, I think about what are your values? If your values are about educating all kids, then this attitude that you have is not allowing you to fulfill that mission. So I think it's about reconnecting people to what's important to you, what matters to you, and your why. And that's what's going to move you through the identity crisis that a lot of white people are going to have as they move through anti-racist work, because it's not going to be easy. It is going to disrupt a lot of what white people believe to be true about who they are and what they know. And that's not an easy thing to undo, but lives depend on it. And that's just where we are. And as an educator, that is your absolute professional responsibility. And if you're not committed to it, I encourage you to leave the profession.
Well said. I hear you. I agree with you. And it's heartwarming when you pushed on the importance of engagement, communication, training. Those are vital, because I still believe that there are some good people. Like, I recall a doctoral student, I was in his committee, and we were 4 committee members, and he defended, and he did well. But when after reading his dissertation, I found out that his dissertation has a component that has some racial connotations. I felt like I had a responsibility. I called him and told him that I wasn't going to sign off. My other 3 faculty members said, Joe, you're kidding me. I said, no, you don't understand. It's a matter of principle. If this guy leaves, the same thing will affect so many other people. So right now we can change it, and I will be stuck with him till he gets it done. So I worked with him tirelessly. Within a month, he was through, and he passed. And then he saw me and jumped on me. I was like wondering why did the person, jump on me like that. He was driven by joy that couldn't be explained. And she articulated in what she wrote to me that I made him to realize what he never knew had happened. And his research, he negated that. And that made the whole difference for me. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, it took a lot of time.
Sorry.
Okay, let's
sorry, not sorry.
Let's move to this time. Let's move to David. David, you had indicated, made the comments, even in the one I saw here, about your activities in terms of what you characterize, as creative learning and stuff like that, which is driving your work. Could you really demonstrate or describe to this group the power of what you are pursuing and where you are taking it from here?
Yeah, I mean, well, one of the things that I've narrowed it down, I mean, it really started as a kind of a broad scope of just how to really address some of the novel challenges that we were facing in education with valid science and principles and strategies in the studies of creativity, which a lot of people get wrong. And it's, in the classroom, I find it amazing how much I have to push to just help students generate ideas and defer judgment. They're afraid to just list ideas that they might not use. They're so trained in giving a correct answer that it's just completely stifling of their creativity. And I think the same block is what exists in our educational leaders for a large amount of it. Like, we're still doing things like, it's the same way. They're recycling different patterns. And that's what I'm trying to get out of. Why are we not giving students more of a voice? You look at the work by Helverson and Collins, and they point out all the benefits of homeschooled students because they're given the responsibility of their own learning. They're given the responsibility to pursue the things that interest them, that they're passionate about, that they're curious about. All the things we talk about best practices comes out because we're taking away that idea of here's a rote curriculum, memorize it, regurgitate it back to us. That's not effective. And that's nowhere near meeting 21st century learners' needs. They need to learn how to use communication, use the technology for communication, even if you're in a rural area. And that's another issue that we have. You talk about the reason education isn't changing, how it's marginalized. I grew up in a very rural area. I threw away an opportunity, literally tore up a piece of paper to have Kurt Vonnegut Jr. as a mentor in high school because I knew my parents couldn't afford to pay for that tuition to go there. All right, these are the sacrifices that I made, and I'm trying to make sure that other students don't have to make these same kind of sacrifices. So the idea of addressing the needs in education, this individual, Wilma Sara in Australia, who's 14 years old, started an organization empowering student voices, youth entrepreneurship. He's still doing it at 18. He's touring Australia. The kid's amazing. Bridging us. And that's one of the things I did immediately when this pandemic hit. I just started reaching out to the experts and other people and networking. And it's about collaboration. And one of the taglines that I saw is addressing a lot of the needs in education and even business and people's needs in this crisis was the idea of if you collaborate, if you put collaboration before competition, you're going to win all day long. Right? And that's what I noticed is there are so many people like yourself that were very willing to give their time, their expertise. And before I knew it, within a month, I had a youth group that was working with Catalyst, with Giancarlo Brado and Adam Collis, who were doing educational facilitations for over 50 countries' prime minister or ministries of education. And the youth team that I worked with got to sit in on those and actually critique the educational leaders and teachers that were envisioning what a hybrid learning experience was going to look for students. And it was astounding how poor they did of envisioning it. They were so blocked in looking at from a teacher. Their main concern for the learner was, oh, well, how are they going to take attendance?
Yeah.
You think we cared about how the teacher's taking attendance? That's not what their concern is. Yeah. The teachers and the educational leaders were so far off in that, and the students jumped on it once they got comfortable with it. It was amazing watching them work. And both the CEOs of Catalyst they loved it. So that's a little bit about what I've been doing is really trying to push that youth advocacy, youth voice, that engagement, involving them in creating some of the solutions that we need in education. And I really think that speaks to the heart of even what Charlotte's talking about. You're only going to be able to overcome that systemic racism in schools when you give the students the power to make their choices in what they're learning and also to share their background. And that's why homeschooled students continue to outperform. When you look at Black students and minority students, that achievement gap on the SATs is pretty much eliminated when they're homeschooled. What other reason is for that? I mean, they have the decision to give that responsibility to them. The idea of sharing stories, creating opportunities for true global learning communities. With online learning, why aren't we taking classrooms in the US and having students engage with other students in Dubai, Nigeria, you name it. And that's what we've started to do. But I'm working with this individual, Cheta, over in Dubai. He's from Nigeria. And I'm actually over here teaching Things Fall Apart. He's from the Igbo clan. And he's going to be speaking with my students. We're hoping second semester to be able to roll out an actual class where these students from part of the students from my class are actually working with other students from other classes around the world on projects. So.
Thank you very much, David. It's fitting here to reflect on some of the questions. I think we have several questions here. Michelle Burr is talking, or rather writing about the power of experience, the power of sharing. And that, again, goes to the heart of what we believe at SDIG. We believe that the enemy of progress is a lack of engagement. When we engage, it opens a new window, windows we would have never known. And through that window, we make connections and learn new. And it's fitting here to tell David, our David, this is another David you need to meet as you plan for your youth development program. Again, there must be something about the Davids in this particular section. All right, I'm gonna shift to our to Lois. Lois, could you tell the audience, having had first-hand experience, having articulated same in your powerful book, could you tell this audience the importance of multiple stories, as one of my fellow country lady, Ngozi Chameze, indicated in her book, The Power of Multiple Stories. Can you use your story to connect, to let these people understand why we focus on stories, to hopefully enable others who will otherwise not see the importance of listening to stories, learning about different experiences, just as David was articulating, whether it's for students having a voice or having parents who may have adopted the alternative way of educating their children, to understand that when we put all those things together, we come with much, 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 much more powerful results.
You want the story with my friend Doreen Myler?
It's your platform. You tell us whichever one you choose.
I'm old now, and I meet all sorts of people. But I grew up in the 1960s attempting to learn to read through the Dick and Jane series, and I met Doreen online, and Doreen's from Malawi. And she grew up in Malawi. I grew up in southeast Queensland, Australia. And yet both of us attempted to learn to read through the book series, Dick and Jane. One learned to read, one didn't. And the one that learned to read is black. So she's from Malawi, and she would look at these pictures and think, where do I fit into this scenario? Are they better than me? I would love to be like the people in the book. And she grew up with lots of questions about who she was in relations to these children. I grew up on the other side of the world in southeast Queensland, wondering, now you excuse my language, who the hell these people were? Where did they come from? I made zero connections with anyone in the book. And all I can say is that I learned to read words, and I was totally alienated by the pictures, let alone the text of Dick and Jane. How does that affect me and my students? Today, big business is taking over learning to read. And we expect every child just has to just learn these words, learn these letters, learn these sounds, and then you'll be fine. And we forget, are children making connections to the text? No text is neutral. And as Charla said, the education system has been set up by white men to make sure white men succeed. And in doing that, we've alienated so many children. So when we come to teaching children to learn to read, our texts are still basically white, middle class and female. And in doing that, who are we ignoring? And even though children may learn to read with that text, it's what message are we sending to those children who learn to read? let alone the children who are being alienated. We're saying, well, you just haven't got it, have you? Instead of saying, what else do we have to do to teach these children to read? Because the moment we bring in culture, their language, and their circumstances and situations, we change the outcomes for the children, and we change the outcomes for society. And I think that's the question we're not asking, is what sort of society do we want to live in? Currently, we're living in a society that condemns black boys. Then we set up a prison system that is for profit. And we have now a nice pipeline. What sort of society do we want to live in?
And black girls. I just want to add that, because we often forget about black girls, but they're also being demonized, also disenfranchised, also an issue. That's it. I'm done.
No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. As in my position, I've taught more black boys than girls. And that's partly because the girls fly under the radar more than anything else. It's not that they are doing less of anything. They just get under the radar.
Thank you.
Black boys are demonized.
Do you focus on a group? Do you focus on a lot of students that are identified with dyslexia?
And my students are older, but you know, all three of us, what we're wanting every time is active engagement with whatever we're doing. And I look at you with your, what do you call it? It's a model, isn't it, that you use? The work that you're doing.
Oh, well, creative problem solving model.
Yes, yes. You know, if we did that earlier with all students and connected it to reading and writing, every student would be better.
Yeah, I actually taught at the Gao School, which is private school for, yeah, you're familiar. Yeah. But yeah, it's girls are actually, they fly under the radar in terms of dyslexia too, because most of them don't find out that they have dyslexia possibly ever, because they're able to actually, the way the female brain works is as a better language center than men's and develops faster. So they typically have the skills needed to kind of cover it up, and it doesn't hit them until college. Yeah. And then that's where they really start struggling, and they have no idea why.
Yes, that's me.
Yeah.
But you know, we're satisfied, and it goes back to the many questions you're asking. We're satisfied with the grade. We're satisfied with just getting through, as opposed to, you know, let's these grade things drive me nuts.
Oh yeah.
How else are we going to encourage children to read and write and enjoy questioning? And you know, there's so much out there on curiosity and tapping into a child's curiosity and how that engages the brain in different ways.
And also too, this archaic system of using quarters and semesters and these just
arbitrary measures.
Yeah, arbitrary deadlines even.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, in the real world, you have some deadlines.
Time is flying against us, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to make a couple of statements, then we shift to the audience questions. You see, what you guys are saying sort of are getting together. I had Shala said not only black boys, but black girls. Yeah. And the other component I want to throw into the equation is, if you go to rural white schools, poverty-stricken schools, it's not different. So my point is that all these stories ought to be told. The pain and anguish we cause is beyond. Even some teachers may think they're doing good because they don't know any better. They cannot do better. One of the critical theories I read during my time of preparation, Michael Apple, who was at Wisconsin University, he posed some big questions. Some of them were along the line of, whose curriculum are we teaching? Whose culture are we teaching? Whose experience are we reflecting in our aspects of our schools? And that goes to another theory where he says that in using cultural continuity for some and cultural discontinuity for others those who embrace school, where they transition smoothly into school system, and all the things that they had done at home translates into school functionalities. Success is always guaranteed for the most part, except the lousy ones. Contrast that with those whose culture and experiences are inconsistent with the school. These are students whom sometimes I cringe for, because there's nothing for them. And some people will say that's their destiny. And that schools is given to people who fit into the narrative of white supremacists, who believe in their little heads that if you're this, you cannot succeed. If you're that, you cannot. Ladies and gentlemen, that's a very good way. And I think we're gonna use this to step into the question and answer section. David? Is David here?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did you put some questions you wanna
I did. I
want us to respond? Or if not, we can, open up the floor for people to, ask questions. But when you're asking, please, 3 people may come at the same time. So I would like for you to use your, what we call number 6, where I came from, to make a judgment whether you pull back so that we can hear the first person, then we hear you.
All right, very good, Joseph. Hey, look, I just have 2 questions I'll pose into whichever panelist wants to take it, and then I want to open it up to other questions from our audience. So, number 1, I asked it in chat was, given that teachers do teach from their own perspectives, how do we, 1, make instructors and teachers aware of those perspectives that they're having and their effect on their teaching and curriculum, and 2, how do we get them to allow more voices other than their own into their teachings?
Is it a specific person or just general? Okay. All right.
I mean, what I think about when it comes to like changing perspective, again, it's about awareness. So one of the exercises I did with my students was I was like, I want you to close your eyes and I want you to imagine an American. And once they open their eyes, I said, did you imagine me? And most of them will say no. When they think about who an American is, they think about a white person. Or when we look at things like the 19th Amendment saying that it allowed all women to vote, no, it allowed white women to vote. I was on that story. So I think it's a matter of just like highlighting for people the various ways that we have limited thinking around certain terms, like the term founding father, that again, that we it's embedded in our curriculum, but those men raped my ancestors. When you say founding fathers, that is violence towards me. So I think it's a matter of making people aware. When we talk about people being slaves, they were not slaves, they were kidnapped and enslaved, they were hostages, they were abused. We need to think about our language. We need to think about pointing these things out. And I want to highlight something since we're talking about this. The term minority, I know it's common, but there's nothing about me that's minor. And that's a term that makes me feel reduced. You know what I mean? I feel less than with the term minority. I'm a person of color. And even if you look at globally, most people are people of color. The average person is an Asian male. So this whole concept that I am a minority when actually the birthplace of humanity is Africa, I'm the original woman, it's a very different space, right? Like you tell me I'm the original woman, humanity came from my people. Well, I stand in power in that. But you tell me I'm a minority, I don't feel good about that. The term achievement gap, I don't like that term either. I say opportunity gap because we're deprived of opportunities, but it's not about our achievements. We built the country, we built the economy. I mean, my people have achieved enormous things. We've survived white supremacy, we've survived genocide. So I think it's a matter of exposing people to their limited language and to their limited viewpoints. And I want to highlight my own limited viewpoints because I pointed out Black girls, but I didn't point out, Black kids who are not on the binary spectrum, Black kids who are the LGBT trans plus community as well, who are also really, really, really marginalized. So it's about exposure. It's about asking questions. It's about having people see the ways that we limit who we're talking to. There's a way that we talk to people that says, I'm not talking to you. And we do it all the time to our students of color. And then we question why they're not coming to class. We question why they're not engaged when our school, everything about our school says, I don't want you here. The fact that we don't recognize that these founding fathers were rapists, the fact that we can say that George Washington, you know, yeah, he had slaves, but he was a good guy. It's always like, it's always excusable, the mistreatment of the Native American people, of Black people. That's excusable. You can totally abuse and mistreat us and still be seen as a good person, but the reverse would not be true, right? You can't be a person of color who's victimized white people and be celebrated. Why are we celebrating Columbus? Why are we celebrating all these people who are horrible people? And I can't feel good in a classroom where you're celebrating my oppressor. You're celebrating people who are abusive to me. You're clearly telling me that I don't matter and that you don't care about me. So why would I be here? So I think it's a matter of teachers recognizing that, and trainings like mine or other trainings that will allow them to see the ways that we perpetuate this, and that it's not about these kids not achieving. It's about, we're setting this up in a way that is not conducive to them achieving, because we can absolutely achieve. We've survived, again, we've survived 400 years of white supremacy. We can achieve. So that's my thinking there.
Yeah, yes, you can. I wanted to go to Lois with that same question because I think she had a comment on that as well.
One of the things I find really interesting to do is to present teachers with a text from another point of view, and ask another point of view, another writing style that is not particularly engaging to them, and then look at why it's not engaging. Because it's only when you stand in someone else's shoes that you can see it from their point of view. And we do this every time to children who come into the classroom and have to read something that they have absolutely no interest in. And we say, well, just sit there and read it because they're the words you've been told to read. And how would we react being told to do that? And poor children cannot stand up and say, I don't like this. I don't like this text. I don't care about it. And when we change the text, we change all sorts of attitudes. And that's what I want to get across to teachers. How do you feel about reading this particular text? Put them in the place of students.
That would be a very good strategy.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you're gonna be engaging all these things in your practices, because you may be reaching people you will otherwise never know.
Yeah.
Because there are some people who never knew what is feels like, for somebody to be given things that are not only that is uninteresting, but actually completely boring.
Yeah.
The last thing the person may want to read.
Yeah.
So by framing it the way you did, you raise the consciousness of the teachers, and hopefully they will be able to use that in, in subsequent practices.
Yeah. Can I add something really quickly?
Yes.
So I wanted to say that it's not, we often talk about this in terms of literacy, and absolutely history and English should be on this, but we don't talk about it when it comes to STEM and science. And what happens in our communities and our culture is that we make person and white synonyms. So when we introduce math and science and we say this, a person invented this, or a person did Pythagoras theorem or whatever, the default is a white male created this. So we need to, even within STEM, we have a responsibility, because when we look at tech companies and we look at technology and where everything's going, you see a lack of women, you see a lack of people of color. So clearly something's going on in our science and math classes that is not addressing that. And there's ways that whatever the subject is, you could be introducing somebody from a marginalized community to highlight. So for example, with climate change, there was this Mexican woman who just created sustainable plastic from cactus. She could be highlighted. We can start highlighting the contribution of George Washington Carver as a genius. So there's ways to go about it regardless of what discipline you're in. It is not just on literacy and history. It is across the board. We need to have an anti-racist curriculum.
Yes.
That's all. Thank you.
I think my dean made some salient points here when he said that the public school system was established to create workers who are efficient and do what they are told to do, not critical thinking.
And we treat our students the same way. Do what you're told to do. Sit down, shut up, especially our students of color. Whenever they fight back or push back, we punish them rather than recognizing, oh, they're being innovative or thinking outside the box. We do not allow our students of color to think outside the box. It is very much still the plantation system of do what the heck I tell you to do, fall in line, or go to jail, essentially, so.
Yeah, I think that's a very important point, which we have to all be grappling with. Because we have to deal with all these issues, and not divorcing them as if they don't exist. Could you imagine if administration of a school isn't aware of all these things? What kind of message do they send? What kind of policy do they have? What are the implications of those to those who just go there to teach?
And I'm sorry too, if there's still teachers, obviously they're going to have their implicit biases, they're going to have their perspective in which they're coming from, and that's going to bleed in there. But if their default is to essentially be teaching the kids what to think, get out of the classroom. That's not your job. You should be teaching kids how to think, but you should be listening to their voice. That should be leading the discussion. And that's why I said I call myself a facilitator of learning. And that's the major shift that needs to be taking place more often in our classrooms, because that, I'm sorry, your political party, your religious views as a teacher should not be making your students feel uncomfortable for their views. They should be able to, you should have an open classroom where you can discuss those varying viewpoints freely. And you, as standing up there and having a position of power, should realize that even if you're not meaning to do it, if you're putting too much of your views out there, and I've had students challenge me the one time, and it was hilarious. Someone actually tried to identify like what my point of views was and saying that I was, being unfair. And I'm like, really? I was like, all right, what religion am I? They had no, I mean, they just started rattling off religions. I'm like, that's right. I was like, what political party do I vote for? They couldn't even come close. I was like, and that's the way it should be. I was like, I'm a blank tablet. I will play devil's advocate in the classroom. I was like, you can try to guess and say that, but you'll never know when I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm not always speaking from my voice. I purposely bring up the different things. And if I hear it going in one direction, I'll purposely throw out that other argument from a different perspective to challenge them. That's critical thinking. That's diversity. That's what should be taking place in the classroom. Not I'm the teacher, we're going to look at it from my lens. Get out of the classroom then.
Okay. David. Is David here?
Which
David Roa.
There we go.
Taking a roll call.
Yes.
Are you looking at the monitoring the questions?
Yes.
We are waiting for you.
Okay, I have another question that may broaden out the discussion a bit. We talked a lot about teachers and how teachers can improve what's being offered to their students. We haven't mentioned anything about the role of parenting in education, nor the role of communities. And I don't know if one of our panelists would like to go broaden out to that level or not, but there it is.
Okay.
I taught a 16-year-old boy back in 2000 who was totally non-reading, and I'm still in touch with him today. And he said to me, my mother was a single mother. My father was out of the picture. She worked from 2 till 10 every day. She did what she could to put food on the table. How do you answer that? What do we do? What else can we do? How do we support the parents so that they can be parents to their children?
If we're truly, go ahead. What were you going to say, Joseph?
Well, I was trying to say, because some of these problems or questions, we could couple it with similar ones. Say, for instance, the one my wife was talking about this morning, who is at home, apparently he may have gotten computer. That is, if he has computer, he doesn't know how to use the computer. He hasn't been, trained in any way, shape, or form. The school is divorced from his circumstance.
Yeah.
And you can see the similarity, and there are so many others that could be, put together, and they will require the same solution.
Yeah.
So the question then becomes, how do we do it?
Yeah.
If I say this, some people will say, well, it means that you're going to be babysitters. Well, there are some parents who may not be able to do this, especially single mothers.
Yeah.
The bigger question will be, in an era where those who could pay taxes that could be used to do some things to better society, the question would then be, what kind of society do we want? What kind of society do we need for all? Do we really believe in what the founders had purported to be self-evidence, that all men or women or whatever, are created equal, endowed by all those wonderful words?
We don't believe it.
How do we move it forward to create truly a fair opportunity for all?
Yeah.
Those are the things we need to be finding ways to handle. Unfortunately, people who actually try to get a hold of the problem, they're labeled this or that because it's the right way to put it. It makes some people feel like energized. So the question then becomes, how do we do it? And the only thing I will say to everyone is to, in your little spot, do all you can. And I say that keeping the word of this famous anthropologist who came up with the word that says, Mead, Margaret Mead, that's do your little thing, because that could change the world. Never doubt your power to change the world. So do what you can in your little space. The power of what you can resonate beyond what you could imagine.
I wanted to speak to what you said about parents, because I just did a Black Wellness Forum for parents, and I think that it's about empowering parents. And I know that as an educator, what made me move, or what got my attention, was when a parent contacted me. And I think that parents coming together, especially Black parents coming together in schools where a lot of times there's not representation, and then collective bargaining, essentially, like being able to share experiences, because these powers that be capitalize on our isolation and on us not coming together. So I think that even if you don't have a school that supports you, the parents can come together and start to compare notes, and then show patterns of racism, and to be able to demonstrate that to the school. But I think that as far as what the schools could do, we need to have parent advocacy groups. We need to make sure that we have parent teacher associations, that the times for those meetings work for all parents, or that we have accessibility for those parents who can't make it, that we have things in different languages. And then I heard of a school that when they were trying to get parents to show up to their meeting, but a lot of the parents were low income, what they did is they partnered with a grocery store or community service that provided every family a bag of groceries. So now I don't have to choose between making money to feed my family and coming to your meeting. So I think it's about getting to know the community. What do they need? What is preventing them from being active? If it's somebody like what Lois was saying, where she's working around the clock, then what can we do there? And I think it's our level of commitment, because what we know is that we're extremely innovative. We're very creative when it matters to us, And I think a lot of schools appreciate or take advantage of the lack of communication from their parents, because then they can operate in isolation and there's no accountability. And I've seen this in situations where there's population of a large Spanish-speaking population, and a lot of times they don't provide those services, or the population that those parents are intimidated, as well as sometimes with African-American parents. And then in addition to understanding the culture of these different groups. So African-American parents, a lot of us, and myself included, even as an educator, we don't trust the system. And so you're going to experience some pushback, and it's not personal. It's that we know that all systems are racist, and schools are no different. So you might be dealing with somebody who's giving you attitude, but what I've learned to do is isolate that. That attitude is not for me. It's because I represent the system, and I need to work on this relationship to show this parent, I am an agent of change. I am not an agent of oppression. So I just want to highlight that parents have an enormous amount of power, and that we need to communicate that to them, and that they can make a difference and speak up on behalf of their child. They have all these rights that are available to them that they often don't know about. And we know that people capitalize on ignorance. So I just wanted to share that piece about parents.
Charlotte, yeah, I'd like to just what you said about educating the parents too, very powerful. I think that's a huge part of it. One of the things I try to do as a teacher is reach out very early in the year with a letter, trying to highlight certain topics and issues and things that we'll be covering throughout the year, so that if they have experience in that and they want to come in and be a guest speaker, and I like to kind of pull the family into the classroom as much as possible. I'm still trying to find ways to make that more effective because the response team seems to be rather limited still. But it's a work in progress, and I think there's a lot of power there. And that's why I said, you know, one of the things I really have been striving to do in my years of education is create more connections and relationships between small businesses, the school, the home, getting them all working together. The 1 year I taught, I had full reign to create my own curriculum. And 3 of my students that year, out of 22 kids, 3 of them launched their own business in 8 months. 2 of them
That is incredible.
did something similar. And then another 4 of them facilitated for small local businesses in the community and had amazing results. The one did an animal shelter and raised their placement of animals in homes by 33% in 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. It was fantastic. And that's the power of what our schools can be doing in our communities and with our families. And that's what I'm really passionate about. I think that's what...
Publishing all this, David? Is this all published?
I know I need to start doing that. My focus has been on the teaching part. And as a teacher living in the Northern Virginia, DC area, I was for years, probably almost a decade, I was working 2 to 3 jobs. So I was in the evenings, was usually in a restaurant serving tables and having all of this going on in my head going, what am I doing on the side of the table? But it's coming down the pipeline.
Well, yeah, and you're getting exposure now, but there's so much opportunity within education. And it's just like you said, we're so limited to giving the right answer. We're so limited to just have these limited ways of thinking rather than what's possible. And I remember sitting in the classroom, like, when I was a student, just like there's so many better ways to teach this lesson, or just ways that you could really get my engagement. And I think it's really about like, who are our clients? What are they interested in? You know, like my son's obsessed with Pokemon. So if I was his teacher, I would put things in terms of Pokemon, like, you know, like I would explain it in whatever they're passionate about, because that's how I'm going to get engagement. And like Lois was saying, you know, we're reading these books where it's just like, I don't care, right? But a lot of times our kids don't even have the vocabulary or don't even have the advocacy or the agency to be like, I don't want to read this. And it's not because I don't want to read, right? It's because this sucks. And it's just like on TV, like you don't throw out your whole TV because one show sucks, you change the channel, right? So I think that when our students are not engaged, we need to go in our toolbox and then find another way to engage them. That's our responsibility. I'm the one who went to school. I'm the one who has a credential. I'm the one who has a master's degree. Why am I then punishing kids when they're not interested in what I'm doing? I need to change it up. So I think that we really need to read our audience and just have we don't respect children in general, but that's part of our problem. But we really need to respect our students and what they're interested in and their opinions. And just like you're saying, like student voice should drive the conversation, but it doesn't.
And that's the other challenge too, because I find it takes a long time to teach the students to speak up for themselves.
Right.
I give them the opportunities and I'm begging for them to voice their opinions. It takes months sometimes.
They might even think it's a trick question. Like you don't really want to hear my opinion, right? Like,
right.
It's crazy.
I think time is running against us, folks. I have someone here who had pointed out research indicating that employing critical race theory is something that people need to consider. And of course, that fits into the narrative of intersectionalism in curriculum because it's encompassing. So that fits into the narrative all of you have indicated here. And as I'm looking at some of these things, I see some really good points people are making, but unfortunately, we cannot even get to all of them. So,
and save the chat for later?
Huh?
Can we save the chat for later? I don't know.
Sure, we can, but for the purposes of this session, I would like to shift straight to, you are taking a minute or two to sum up your idea, and then within that context, give your call for action, and also keep in mind that when I said 2 minutes, I'm using it in the strictest form of it, because we don't have time. Otherwise, the best thing would have been for me to say 1 minute, but I don't want to say that. So to that, let's go straight to Louis. Louis, could you give your summative statement?
Yes, I was just writing down my notes. Create actively engaged students, respect their culture, and there was, David, there was something else you were saying that now I've forgotten. And one more, that we need to give advocacy and voice to our students. We need to listen.
Thank you. Well summarized. Okay, let's shift to David. David, summation.
Permission, you said?
Summation of all these things
Yeah,
you've been talking about.
Collaboration over competition, community, home, business, school. We really need to develop that. And youth voice, youth advocacy, and a focus on entrepreneurship. That's the direction. Leading students to think that their only pathway of success is through college education is completely setting up them for failure in this day and age. Over 60% of people that get higher degrees don't use that degree.
Yep.
That's facts.
Yep.
And you're saddling them with over a 6-figure debt at this point.
Yep.
Give them a pathway to explore before that option. Because I'm sorry, if you had given me six-figure income coming out of high school, no, I wouldn't have needed college. Both through college as it was. It was, yeah.
Well,
I value education, but honestly, that was 6 years of my life that I feel like I could have been doing better things.
Well, perhaps that's where I may disagree with you a little bit, because thank God to those 6 years, that has built your intellectual capacity to be able to articulate all these things in complex ways.
I like what Sully Breaks says about education. If you ever see his Why I Love Learning But Hate Education poem, spoken word, Sully Breaks, it's spot on with what my experience was like. Again, I value it. I like the relationship, the networking aspect. But for those students, especially that don't get taught how to network and don't go into school thinking or knowing that they need to network while in college, I tell my students straight out, if you go to college and you get a 4.0, but you don't network, you failed.
Yes.
Period.
You're right. And those are limitations, limitations that ought to be brought into the equation. Thank you very much, David. We're gonna go to Shala now. Shala?
So my final statement is that we need more professional development for school leaders and for educators, and that we need to put things in a historical white supremacist context, that we don't have to necessarily, I mean, I want the schools reformed, absolutely. But if we could just explain to the kids that what you're experiencing is racism and it's not you, that would be like miraculous, because then they would know what the heck is going on. And then I think that educators, they need to check themselves and their identity. They need to check their curriculum. They need to look out for the psychological safety of their staff and students. And I want to highlight my workshop coming up, Black Wellness in Schools, December 19th. And I also, if people want to get in touch with me, I'm at healingracism.com. Sorry, healingracisminschools@gmail.com to establish that professional development for school leaders. So there you go.
Thank you very much. David?
Thank you. Thank you so much for this.
Yes, thank you for this.
Right. David?
I'll add my thank you to this esteemed panel of engaging folks. And I have taken notes and notes and notes. I'm not going to summarize them here, but I'm going to post them in LinkedIn later. How's that?
Thank you very much. That's very kind of you, David, because we are just running out of time. And,
where can we see this, Joseph?
Go to this
where will...
diversity and inclusion group If you
It's
search,
part of our team. Sorry.
Okay.
yeah, if you search
All right.
Systemic Diversity and Inclusion Group in LinkedIn, I will post them as a post there.
Great.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Thank you so much. And I want to use this opportunity to thank all of you that, came. And we're going to continue to perfect this. We borrow from those who said they're perfecting the union. We keep working to perfect our work here. I especially thanks to our brilliant panelists and all those that came. If you have any question or ideas as to how we continue to push for that improvement, you can send me email. You could see my information at the LinkedIn, or you can write me via jinwoye@systemicdiversity.org, or you can also write me at jinwoye@diversityfrontier.com. And on that note, we know we have our session coming up on the 25th, and that session will as well begin at 12 noon and last about the same time. On that, I want to thank you, all of you. I really appreciate all of you, and have a good day.